Welcome to another episode of Kicking It with Colette. This episode is a continuation of a previous episode I did on my new Rona hobby, gardening. So if you haven't already heard that one, go back and listen to that one first. Well, you don't have to listen to it first because it all flows together. Whatever. Anyway, after I recorded that episode, I thought of a few more gardening tips / lessons. Remember, no L's, only lessons. So I decided to make a part 2. Okay, that was my failed attempt at French. Je m'appelle Colette. Okay, that's all the French I know, aside from what I learned from Beauty and the Beast. Anywho, so let's kick it into this next episode and be my guest. Be my guest. Okay, so it's been a few weeks since my previous episode on gardening, and actually a few months since I've planted my original seeds. And I would love to tell you that my garden is flourishing and green and beautiful, and I'm ready to harvest from it, and that I can cut back on my grocery bill now. But that would be a lie. The gardening thing, not really popping off like I thought it would. But hey, no else, only lessons. And so yeah, most of my plants they're barely surviving, and I'm doing my best, but it's okay. Either way, it's been a fun experiment. Now, I was just outside checking on my little sprigs in my dirt, and I did notice that one of my sweet potatoes, I planted sweet potatoes, which was one of the first things that I planted, and it's like a vine. And a couple weeks ago, one of them basically started dying. I don't know if it broke or something ate it, but it was like a whole situation. And like the top part of the vine just died. And eventually I just plucked it off and threw it to the side. But I noticed today that after the broken piece of the vine, that there's actually some leaves starting to come up. It's like the vine is starting to branch off from another location. So I was so happy about that. And I was like, yes, renewed hope in my vine. It's not over yet. It ain't over until God says it's done. But I was praising. I was so happy about that. And also my cucumbers that I planted, they actually have a blossom on it. So I was like, yes, I may actually get a cucumber. So I'm so excited. Hopefully that it'll, continue to blossom and grow. But yeah, even if it doesn't, I'm still happy that it was like renewed faith, renewed hope in my garden. But yeah, like I said in the intro, though, I thought of a few more things that I wanted to add to my gardening and life lessons in gardening, and I wanted to share those with you. And the first thing is, don't be afraid to prune. As I listen to these gardening videos on the YouTubes, on the interwebs, and the Googles, one thing that's significant is pruning. And there are several reasons why you would want to prune. Now, sometimes you're pruning a plant that looks perfectly healthy and it seems silly. Like, why would you cut that off if everything is good? But I learned, like with basil, for example, sweet basil is what I have, and it will continue to grow upwards. But in order to make it bush out and grow more horizontally, in order for it to grow more horizontally and kind of round out and bush out, you need to prune it. So you take your little shears and you snip, and where you had one stem, now it's going to grow out in two directions versus one. And if you keep doing that, it'll kind of bush out in like a nice basil bush versus like a tall basil plant. And there are several other herbs and vegetables that you can do like that, where you prune it to make it bush out. And I think about like pruning in your life. When you prune something as a plant, you prune it to promote growth in a different direction. Woo, that's a word. So you don't want to prune it didn't prune my basil to stop it from growing. I pruned it to encourage it and promote it to grow in the direction that I wanted it to grow. So think about that. If you get during some pruning in your life, it may not be that you shouldn't grow. It's just you need to be growing in a different direction. And when you grow in a different direction, it's actually more fruitful and more beneficial for the plant is when you prune it to make it grow in a different direction. And as I said before, we humans, we're the next generation of plants. So, take that advice too. Don't be discouraged by the pruning. Just know that you're supposed to grow in another direction, and that you would actually be more fruitful in that other direction. And another thing with pruning is this here podcast. As I edited, that's a hard word for me to say. As I worked to edit, other episodes, trying to decide what to keep in and what to take out. Now, there were some things that I thought was cool and I wanted to say to keep it in, but as I listened to it, it didn't necessarily flow with the entire episode, so I just took it out. And again, don't be afraid to prune in order for it to flow and grow in another direction. Another reason to prune is to prevent the spread of disease. So basically, when your plants like maybe have some black spots or some sort of indication of disease on a particular leaf, what you want to do is prune that off as soon as you see it. And another thing is to check on your garden on a regular basis so you can catch these things early, right? So you would prune to prevent disease because you don't want that disease spreading to the rest of the plant and then potentially to the rest of your garden. And then you've got to treat everything and it's going to limit your harvest and it's just going to be a lot to deal with. So you prune early to prevent the spread of disease. And so pruning may look like, wearing a mask. Wait, who said that? So speaking of, preventing disease, I was also trying to prevent infestation of bugs that eat and chew on your leaves and prevent holes coming in your plants and everything. And I heard that neem oil is a good thing to use in a garden to spray on the leaves to prevent eating and chewing and sucking insects from eating your leaves. So I was at the store and I was in the gardening section and I saw some neem oil spray, right? And it was for organic gardening, blah, blah, blah. It was $10 and some change. And I was about to grab it. Then I noticed that there was some neem oil right next to it that was $5 and some change. And I compared the ingredients. They both had the same amount of neem oil. They were both had the same function. So I was cool, I'm just going to get the $5 bottle. So I got the $5 bottle. I took it home. And then later, a day or two later, I went to spray the neem oil spray on the leaves of the plant to prevent, insects and everything. So I went to read the instructions on, how much do I need to spray, et cetera, et cetera. And as I'm reading, I realized there's a whole booklet on the back of this spray bottle. And it's all these precautions. It's keep away from children. Don't spray on, animals. Make sure you wear gloves before you spray it. Don't let it get in contact with your skin. Keep out of your eyes. Notify the post office before use. And it was a whole gambit, a whole list of things and precautions on this spray bottle. And I flipped back to the front and it said for organic gardening. And I was wait a minute, maybe I don't know what organic means. Why would it have all these harmful effects to it if it was organic? So people, make sure you read the label before you start using stuff because, organic may not mean what you thought it means. Now, granted, there are things that are organic but are still chemicals and actually poisonous, like arsenic, for example. But I was a little taken aback for this gardening thing. I was going to use the spray on my vegetable garden. So it did not seem safe for me to spray it on my lettuce leaves and tomatoes and everything. And it's not safe enough to get in contact with my skin. I was there's a huge red flag to that. So I took it back to the store and I just returned that cheap bottle of neem oil. And what I'll do instead is I'll just make my own neem oil solution. You can buy the neem oil as a concentrate from Amazon or somewhere and just mix up your own solution with neem oil and water, a little bit of soap in order to make it disperse because, oil and water don't mix, remember, and add, some other essential oils and whatnot to it. And I'll just create my own neem oil bug spray instead because that stuff was not working out. So, yeah. And the next thing I learned, I had to take my own advice. Don't you hate when you do that? When you give someone else great advice and then you realize that you should be taking your own advice. Well, that happened to yours truly. I was re-listening to the episode about gardening, and I talked about not being afraid to start over. And that actually applied to the very first episode of this podcast. Now, the first episode is about Hamilton. First one that I recorded and that I worked on. And initially, it wasn't coming together like I wanted it to. I liked what I said, but I didn't like how I said it. Like, the voice coming through didn't sound like me. And I had a problem with that. And I went back and forth with, should I post it? Should I not? I worked so hard on it. I should probably post it because or else my work would have been in vain, blah, blah, blah. But as I was talking to my sister about this conundrum that I find myself in, well, this quandary of what I should do, and she told me very good advice. She said, don't post it just because you worked hard on it. And then she said, you were supposed to work hard on it. It was your first one. And I was like, what? Girl, you know what? You are right. So just because we work hard at things doesn't mean we have to show them to the world. So, but then I ended up taking my own advice because I liked the episode, but I didn't like how I sounded in it. So I took my own advice and I just started over. I just re-recorded it. I took what I liked and I re-recorded it and it started from there. And it was so much better. And I felt like it was so much better because I wasn't afraid to just start over, keep the essence of it, but make sure it sounded like me. So with my garden, now I say that pertained to gardening because there were times when my first seedlings didn't grow. So I replanted them. And I did that with some lettuce and some spinach and a few other leafy greens that I had planted too soon. And I'm happy to say that they are growing. They're still growing. It's not like big and bushy and thriving at this point. And I need to get some fertilizer, but we'll talk about that later. I need to go back to the YouTubes and the Googles and figure out which fertilizer I want to use. I had another little issue in my garden. I noticed a lot of my plants were yellowing. A lot of the leaves were yellowing, and I didn't know what was wrong with it. So I was like, I don't know what's going on. So I'm just going to water it real quick and figure this out later. So watered the plant, watered my garden just a little bit, give it something to drink. And went back in the house, and then I started Googling and doing some research and found out a reason why the leaves will start yellowing is from overwatering. So I actually just perpetuated the problem by watering it, which also goes to show you too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So I felt really silly about that one. Okay, so confession, this really has nothing to do with anything, but I just wanted to share. Okay, so I bought some blood meal that I heard was good for plants. Blood meal, yes, that's what I said. Now, silly me, I was thinking blood meal was probably some sort of colloquial name that it's not. I mean, who sells blood meal? Who sells blood in the store? So I bought it. Good for greens, right? I'm in my garden. I open up the bag and it's like legit dried blood. What? That creeped me out significantly. And even though it's good for my vegetables, it seemed weird. I was like, what is this little shop of horrors? Why am I feeding my plants blood? It was just so crazy to me. And then I thought about if I put it in the soil, it's dried blood, and then I water it, and it's liquefied, and then it's this actual blood. Like, ugh. And I know other farmers, they talk about using it and it's great for your plants. But even as a vegetarian, it's like, yo, that's weird. That is weird. And it's probably and then like, whose blood is this? It's maybe blood from like a slaughterhouse or for animals. And, maybe it's blood from, it's a byproduct from, who is it that makes the sausage? Jimmy Dean. Maybe it came from Jimmy Dean, after they slaughtered the pigs and make the sausage and make the blood. But it's just weird. Even as a vegetarian, I was a bit creeped out. Okay, no, I'm not a vegetarian because I'm like all about the animals or anything. Animals are cool, fine, but that's not why I'm a vegetarian. But this whole blood meal thing completely creeped me out. So I just put it back in the Lowe's bag and I tied it up with a knot and I stashed it in the garage. I don't think I can return it because it's open, but yeah, really creepy. Blood meal. But apparently blood meal has a lot of what's that stuff called? Nitrogen. Blood meal is like a significant source of nitrogen, which is good for leafy greens, but it doesn't make it any less creepy. I also heard that coffee grinds is a good source of nitrogen. So I'm probably going to go that route instead, especially since I drink a lot of coffee. So might as well do that. But, oh man, creepy stuff, blood meal. It has nothing to do with anything, but I just wanted to share that story. Another thing that I learned with my gardeningness is about plants that quote unquote go to seed or they bolt. Now, have you ever wondered where like lettuce seeds come from, or carrot seeds, or spinach seeds? Like, where does that come from? Of course, everybody knows where apple seeds come from. They're right there in the middle of the apple. You know, avocado seeds is that big old pit in the middle of an avocado. But certain things that don't have a fruit like that, like where the heck did the seeds come from? I finally learned that. Took me 34 years, told my age, 34 years to realize where these seeds come from. And lettuce seeds, spinach seeds, other type of, carrot seeds, those things come from when the plant, quote unquote, goes to seed. And what that means is, it's like when the plant is about to die, it will grow this big stalk up through the middle, like a nice vertical stalk. Now, lettuce, of course, grows out, like kind of blooms like a head of lettuce. You know what I'm talking about? But instead, it grows up vertically, and then at the top, it will produce a flower. And then when that flower dies, inside that flower will be the seeds. Now, I thought that's a really interesting process that I knew nothing about. But it's kind of cool because that's how your plant is dying. It's like that last push in order to produce. It'll use that last bit of energy to create that stalk, to create a flower and create seeds. And I thought that was like a really interesting thing, that when it's dying, it's like the plant's dying wish is to use the rest of its energy to create for the next generation. Isn't that cool? And makes you think of Guardians of the Galaxy. Y'all remember Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy? It's like similar thing. Like he turned into a flower or something and produced, and then there was like another little baby Groot. But yeah, so that's where lettuce seeds come from, and that's where carrot seeds and other leafy greens and other vegetables that don't actually have a seed like in the middle of it. It comes from the plant's last attempt at life is to produce and create the next generation. So instead of like the plant, just dying on the battlefield, is like, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out swinging, and it produces seeds, and it's like to the next generation, and then it dies, and then the curtain closes. Okay, maybe I'm a little bit dramatic, but that's how I see things happening in my head. But also another name for going to seed is bolting. Like you leave, you bolt, like you get out of Dodge, and the plant is like, I'm about to leave out here. Boom, seeds, done. But yeah, so interesting thing, going to seed and making sure it's like the plant's last move, dying wish is to make sure there's something left to create the next generation. And about plants going to seed. So some would go to seed and produce a flower, and that's the end of the life. But then there are some plants like kale that will continue to produce. Now, kale, when you harvest it, you just snap off the outer leaves, and the plant continues to grow and mature. You snap off the outer leaves or whatever, and it continues to grow. But when you notice it's starting to go to seed, what you can do is just cut off the whole stalk. Like cut the stalk down. And basically what that does is like hitting the reset button on that kale plant. The stalks, as a kale matures, it gets kind of like thick and woody. My stalks don't look like this because I still have little sprigs at this time, but I watch YouTube videos. So it'll start getting like thick and woody, and then it'll start going to seed. Just cut the whole thing. And it's like hitting reset, and the leaves will start growing back, start over again. So again, like, don't be afraid to prune. Man, plants are an amazing thing once you get to studying them. Another thing about seeds, like if you ever just think of the concept of a seed, that teeny seed produces the entire plant, entire tree. And let's say you have one lettuce plant, right? And it bolts. It goes to seed. It produces a flower. The flower dries up and dies. And inside that flower, you may have like a handful of seeds. I don't know how many actual. This is just a story. We're just going to go with it. Let's say there's a handful of seeds in that flower. The cool thing is that you got that handful of seeds started with one single seed. So it's like everything you need to create a whole plant and to create a whole handful of seeds and to feed, a whole family of people is in that one tiny little seed. It's not anything extra added to it. Of course, you can say water and nutrients, whatever, but all of that is inside that tiny little seed. You can feed several people, and create a whole garden with one little seed. Let's say you have one seed this season, right? You plant one seed this season, it produces, you get a little harvest, cool, bolts, goes to seed. Now you got like 20 seeds. Next season, you plant 20 of those plants. Same thing happens. Then from each of those 20 plants, you get another 20 seeds. And I'm losing track because I'm not that great at math. So there's 20 times 20. You get more seeds. Okay, was it 400? So you get let's say you get 400 seeds from the 20. So within a couple seasons, you went from having one little plant in a terracotta pot to having like a couple of acres, all from one single seed. And that makes me think of the Bible when it says, do not despise small beginnings. Just think of each small beginning as a single seed. And you continue to sow that thing season after season. And pretty soon, you'll have acres, you'll have acres of whatever it is. You can have an empire, The Jolly Green Giant started with a seed. Now it's like a whole company, I think. Is that still a company? Is that still a thing? But either way, it's just started with one single seed. And all you need was in the seeds. And another thing I learned about seeds is, okay, I tried to plant my seeds basically the same way, right? But they don't all work like that. I learned that some seeds need to be started inside and transplanted outside. Some seeds, like spinach, don't like to be transplanted, and you should plant the seed directly. I learned that some seeds need light to germinate, like lettuce. You plant it really shallow, basically dusted on the top because it need light to germinate. And then you learn that some seeds, like maybe peppers, that don't need the light to germinate. And it makes me think of like people. That's the danger of comparison, and that's the danger of equality. Like there's a difference between equality and equity, and not to make this too political, but I want to just open up your brain a little bit. In a democratic society where we say, we want to make sure everyone is equal, but just equal and being the same is not the same. Like equal opportunity. Like if I were equal opportunity about my seeds, I would give each seed the same opportunity to grow. No, equal opportunity for one seed may be planting it outside in the sun. Equal opportunity for the other seed may be starting it inside in the garage. Equal opportunity for another seed may be starting it outside but in the shade. But you give each seed the attention it needs in order for it to grow adequately. And that's the danger of comparison, like even as individuals, how we look at other people on Instagram and we see how they're doing things, and then you try to apply the same to yourself or your life or your business, and it doesn't work because you may be a different type of seed. And at the same time, when you finally see it, you don't know how long that germination time was for that person. There are some seeds that take a long time to germinate. And by germinate, I mean like produce a sprout, like break the surface. So for some seeds, it may be 20, 25, 30 days before you even see any little sprig break the surface. And then there's some seeds that you planted and 2 days later you see a little sprig. So just because your sprig isn't producing yet, you may just be one of them seeds that takes a little bit of time to germinate. Doesn't mean you even less of a plant? No, you're still a great plant. We still love you. But you just take a little bit more time to germinate. Another cool thing about the seeds is when you plant the seed and watering it, that's like the seed signal that it's time to grow. So basically, you got to put the seed in the right environment in order for it to grow. Again, if we are like plants, us people, the next generation of plant, sometimes people may not be thriving, and because they're not in the right environment, their body, their spirit, their soul, or whatever is not getting that signal, hey, it's time to grow, because they've yet to be planted or they've yet to be watered, and they just need to get in the right environment. And it makes me think of a story when I was a restaurant manager. There was someone that was one of our dishwashers. We had a opening on the front line for one of our a new employee, and we were hiring. But one of the dishwashers came to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to try for this position." And I was like, okay, I'm willing to give people a shot. Like sometimes people don't flourish just because they've never been given the opportunity. So I said, okay, we'll give you a probationary period. Let's say 6 weeks. We'll try you on the line, see how it works. So I put him on the line. 6 weeks. It went by, and he actually did really well. And months down the road, he actually became like one of my best line servers. He was flourishing in the position as a line server versus, a dishwasher. Now, I've had judged him as a dishwasher. I would have never given him the opportunity. He would have never had the opportunity to shine as a line server. So to me, that's like an example of getting a seed into the right environment. And for some people, you may need to be in the right environment. You may need to change jobs. You may need to change positions. If you're a manager or even a parent, if your child isn't flourishing, you may need to change something, put them in a different position and allow them to flourish. So yeah, that's the cool things about seeds, and give them time to germinate. Give them time to actually come up and produce. So yeah, those are just a few things that I kind of learned with my gardening, and just want to share with you. So hopefully you'll feel encouraged in your life. Don't give up on the seeds of your life, and maybe you want to try some gardening yourself. Again, it's no else, only lessons. So yeah, thanks for joining me. Thanks for kicking with me today. Bye now.